Hey, sixth graders, we're on to our next lesson, 7-12. This is all about converting units of length, and we're going to be learning strategies to do that, and you also not just converting units of length, but also using it to calculate some areas with different units. All right, so we are going to start off by talking about centimeters and millimeters. Some of this will be a review, some of it will not. All right, so we're going to label the double number line below to show how centimeters and millimeters are related. Centimeters and millimeters start out the same on a ruler. There's 0. If you have 1 centimeter, that's made up of 10 millimeters. 2 centimeters is 20 millimeters. 3 centimeters is 30 millimeters, and so on. And you can see that for every centimeter, because there are 10 millimeters inside of it, the centimeters count by 1 as the millimeters count by 10. So in 10 centimeters, the same distance, you could call it 100 millimeters. So we're going to look at 2 different unit rates to compare centimeters and millimeters. The first one is there are 10 millimeters per centimeter. So we can write this unit rate as 10 millimeters for every centimeter. There's also 1/10 of a centimeter per millimeter. We can write this unit rate as 1/10 of a centimeter per millimeter. So unit rates, these, I'm going to star them, they can be helpful for converting measurements from one unit to another. So we're going to show how you can use a proportion and how you can also use these new ideas of a unit rate to make some conversions. It says compare these methods of converting 52 centimeters to millimeters. So the first way is you could write and solve a proportion. You could say that you know that 1 centimeter is worth 10 millimeters. So on your proportion, you could say 52 centimeters, and you're going to put x, you're going to solve for how many millimeters that is. And we know that on a proportion, you can use cross multiplication. So on the left side, we have 52 times 10, and on the right side, we have 1 times x. Well, 52 times 10 is 520. 1 times x is just x. So 520 is x, which means 52 centimeters equals x, which we just solved, was 520 millimeters. Well, you could also do it using a unit rate. And a unit rate strategy would look like this. Start with your 52 centimeters, and you're going to multiply it by the unit rate of 10 millimeters per centimeter. And the unit centimeters, they end up canceling each other out, kind of just like zeros do when you're talking about fractions. And if I say 80 over 8, let's do 800 divided by 80. We say the zeros cancel each other out in a fraction. We say, oh, well, then I know the answer, because 8 divided by 8 is 1. And then you have 1 0 left over, so the answer is 10, right? Zeros cancel each other out. Well, the same thing happens always in fractions. If you have the same thing on your numerator and denominator, the same thing on your numerator and the same thing on your denominator always equals just 1. That's what it means when it says it cancels. It goes away because it turns into the number 1. So in a fraction, when you multiply by 1, you get the same thing. Okay, so if you have a centimeter on your numerator and your denominator, then it goes away. And that means you end up with 52 times 10, which is 520. And you're left over with just the millimeters, okay? So when you use the unit rate strategy, how do you know which unit rate do you use? Do you use the 10 millimeters to centimeters, or do you use the 1/10 centimeters to millimeters? Well, the one that you use depends on which conversion you're trying to make. If you're trying to start with centimeters and go to millimeters, you're going to use this one. If you're trying to start with millimeters and convert it to centimeters, then you would use this one, okay? And one easy way to remember that, I think, is that if you're starting with something bigger and you want it to go, like if you're starting with a bigger measurement, centimeters are bigger than millimeters are, and you're trying to figure out the tiny measurement, then you're going to multiply it by 10, okay? If you are at the smaller one, millimeters are smaller, and you're trying to convert it to bigger, like centimeters are bigger, you're going to times it by 1/10. You'll end up dividing by 10. That's what that means. Multiply by 10, divide by 10. But times it by 1/10, and that's how you'll use your unit rate. All right, so we're going to try it on our own. Complete these methods for converting 85 millimeters into centimeters. Well, the first way is to use a proportion. I know that 1 centimeter is 10 millimeters. So how many centimeters are in 85 millimeters? Notice that on a proportion, you keep the same unit on the same side or the same part of your fraction. So both the millimeters are in the denominator, both the centimeters are in the numerator. So we can use cross multiplication to get 10 times x equals 1 times 85, which is just 85. So in order to isolate our variable, we divide by 10, 85 divided by 10, and we end up with x equals 8.5. And I can do that in my head because anything divided by 10, you're just moving the decimal over like this. So we end up with 8.5. So 85 millimeters equals 8.5 centimeters. Well, what if we wanted to use the unit rate strategy instead? Well, they kind of set us up here to help us learn, and they said 85 millimeters, that's what we started with. You're going to multiply it by the unit rate. Now, which unit rate do we use? Okay, well, we're starting with millimeters, and we would like to find the centimeters. So we're going to use this one. We're going to multiply it by 1/10. So 85 times 1/10, that's the same as saying 85 divided by 10, which is 8.5. So there's just more than one way to do it. So now instead of millimeters and centimeters, we can check out what it's like to do feet and inches. So we have on our tape diagram here, which is representing a ruler, we have 0 feet, that's the same as 0 inches. So we're going to fill this out. 1 foot would be 12 inches. 2 feet would be 24 inches. 3 feet would be 36 inches. Notice the top we're just counting by 1, and the bottom we're counting by 12. So we'll continue. 4, 48, 5, 60, 6, 72, 7, 84. By the way, this is easier if you've memorized your 12 multiplication facts. 8, 96, 9, 108, and 10, 120. So finally, when we get to 10 feet, another way to make that same measurement is saying it's 120 inches. So what are the two unit rates in this situation? Well, the first one they're asking us for is inches per feet. So what would it be? How many inches per feet? A unit rate is always about how many is 1, right? So we could say 12 inches is 1 foot. Well, if you want to go the other way, how many feet per inch? It's the opposite of that, or the inverse. Okay, the reciprocal. 1/12 of a foot is equal to 1 inch. So when you're using these two different unit rates, you're going to multiply by a unit rate if you want to use it. But on this first one, you would multiply if you have feet and you would like to find out how many inches it is. This next one, you would multiply by 1/12, or in other words, divide by 12, if you have inches and you would like to figure out how many feet it is. Okay, I'm going to use this one. All right, so we're going to use that strategy. Both of these, it says don't use a proportion. Try using the new unit rate strategy. So number 6 says convert 132 inches to feet. So it's telling us do inches to feet. Inches to feet. We're going to use the second unit rate right here, the one that says 1/12. 132 inches. When you use a unit rate, you multiply it by the unit rate. So by 1/12 feet per inch. Well, our inches cancel out and we're left with just the feet, which is what we want. So it's 132 times 1, and then the denominator is 12. So this turns into 132 over 12, which we just need to solve. Do you guys know what 132 divided by 12 is? If you've already memorized your 12 facts, you already know it's 11. So 132 inches, another way of saying that, is 11 feet. So our next one, convert 6.5 feet to inches by multiplying by a unit rate. Well, this is saying feet to inches. That's this one, feet trying to find inches. We're going to multiply it by the unit rate. In other words, multiply by 12. So 6.5, multiply it by 12. Well, we know that fractions, you cannot multiply them unless they are written as, you can't have like a mixed number in there. So I could turn this into a fraction instead of a mixed number, or I could turn it into a decimal, and I think decimals are easier to work with. So I'm going to turn it into 6.5, because I know 0.5 is the same as a half, times 12. So I need to solve 6.5 times 12. And here's me doing that. And I get 780, but I need to deal with my decimal. I cannot forget that. My decimal moved one place in my factors, so in my product, it's also going to move one place, and I end up with 78.0, which is the same as 78. So 6.5 feet, if I multiply it by the unit rate, is 78 inches. All right, so now we are going to answer a couple more questions. Number 8 says, what two unit rates relate centimeters and meters? So we did talk about centimeters before. We did centimeters and millimeters. That was our first page, centimeters and millimeters. Now we're going to do centimeters and meters. Well, I know that for centimeters and millimeters, the first time it was 1 centimeter was 10 millimeters. Well, now I know that we're talking about meters and centimeters, so 100 centimeters equals 1 meter. So there's two unit rates here that we can figure out. The first unit rate is, you could say there's 100 centimeters per meter. There's also 1/100th meters per centimeter. Notice that if you just flip your measurements, then you just end up writing the reciprocal. Instead of 100 over 1, it's 1 over 100. Okay? So this first unit rate would be used if you have meters and you're trying to find centimeters. The second unit rate would be used if you have centimeters and you're trying to figure out how many meters you want. So we're going to use these unit rates on our next two problems. It says convert 7.9 meters to centimeters. Okay, so if I have meters and I want to figure out how many centimeters it is, that's this first unit rate, meters trying to find out centimeters. So to use the unit rate, you multiply by the unit rate. So I will do 7.9 multiply by the unit rate, 7.9 meters multiplied by the unit rate, which is 100 centimeters per meter. My meters cancel out and I will be left with centimeters, which is what I would like. So I need to do 7.9 times 100. Well, the nice thing about multiplying by 100 is I have 7.9. Multiplying by 100 means my decimal's going to the right instead of to the left. And there's 2 zeros in 100, which means it's going to move 2 decimal places to the right. So 1 2, which means I need to add an additional 0 here, and my answer ends up being 790. Now for number 10, we're going to convert 42 centimeters to meters. So it's centimeters trying to find meters. Centimeters trying to find meters. I'm going to use the 1/10 or 1/100th unit rate. So I start with 42. I multiply, I did this last time too. 42 centimeters, multiply it by my unit rate of 1/100th meters per centimeter. My centimeters cancel out because one's on the numerator, one's on the denominator, and I'm left with just meters. So now I have 42 times 1 as my numerator, which is just 42. 1 times 100, which is just 100, as my denominator. And 42 over 100, another way to write that is 42 divided by 100. And 42 divided by 100 means my decimal point starts here at 42.0, and we're dividing, so it moves to the left. 1, 2. So it ends up being 0.42 meters. All right, number 11. What two unit rates relate feet and yards? Okay, so now we're doing feet and yards. Now, I know that there are 3, maybe that marker is a little bit hard to see. I'll pick a different color here. I know that there are 3 feet equal to 1 yard because I've already memorized that. So the unit rate then would be 3 feet per yard. Or if I wanted to know the other unit rate, it would be the inverse. 1/3 yard for every foot. And you would use the one on the left if you have yards and you're trying to find feet. You would use the one on the right if you have feet and you're trying to calculate yards. So let's use these unit rates to solve our next 2 problems. Convert 16 feet to yards. So you have feet and you want yards. I have feet and I want yards. I'm going to use this unit rate of 1/3 yard per foot. So I take 16, I multiply it by my unit rate of 1/3 yard per foot. Oops, this was 16 feet. My feet cancel out and I'm left with yards. So I end up with 16 yards divided by 3. And you can leave it as 16 divided by 3 because you could. Or you could figure out what is that as a mixed number if you wanted to. If you wanted to solve 16 divided by 3, you could say you get 5 1/3. If you wanted to write it that way, you could. So 16 feet is 5 1/3 yards. Okay, the last one on this page says convert 24 yards to feet. So if you have yards and you want to find feet, we're going to use this unit rate. So you start with what you had at the beginning, which was 24 yards, and you multiply it by your unit rate. My unit rate is 3. So if I can solve, oh sorry, I should write the units too. So feet per yard. My yards cancel out and I end up with just feet. So if I can solve 24 times 3, I'll get my answer. And I end up with 72 feet. All right, so if we move on in our lesson, we're going to talk about how this relates to area. We have a little story here to show why this matters. Riley and Kelsey wanted to find the area of their rectangular bedroom. Riley measured the length and Kelsey measured the width. They made the sketch at the right to show their measurements. Below are the girls' area calculations. So you guys can see their sketch that we have 5 yards and 12 feet. If we did area, you could not just multiply 5 by 12 because these are different units. Yards and feet cannot be mixed together. You need to have both yards or both feet. So Riley said, I want to find the area in square yards. So I have to change my friend's 12 feet into yards. So she wants to figure out how many yards this is. So she took her 12 feet and multiplied it by the unit rate of 1/3 yards for every foot. And that ended up being 4. So now she can calculate the area. Area is just length times width. So she did, this ended up being 4 yards. So length times width was 5 times 4, which was 20 yards squared. Because she ended up doing 4 times 5 equals 20. Well, Kelsey wanted to find the area in square feet. So she already had 12 feet. She wanted to know that 5 yards, how many feet was that? So in order for her to make that calculation, she used the unit rate of 3 feet for every yard. And she multiplied by her unit rate. 5 times 3 is 15 feet. So she found out that this side was 15 feet. So she used the area formula, area is length times width, and she got 15 times 12, because she did 12 feet times the 15 feet, and she got 180. So she did 15 times 12 equals 180. So they got different answers. Riley got 20 yards squared. Kelsey got 180 feet squared. And the reason their answers are different is because one of them measured with feet and one of them measured with yards. So number 14 said, discuss what they did. That's what we just did. Number 15 says, well, explain how the diagram at the right shows that 1 yard squared is equal to 9 feet squared. Well, that's because in the picture, there's 1 yard squared. Like, here's a yard, there's a yard, 1 times 1 equals 1, right? So 1 yard on one side for the length, 1 yard on the other side for the width, 1 times 1 equals 1. So it's 1 yard squared. But we know that in a yard, it's made up of 3 feet. Okay, so this same thing that says 1 yard, it's also 3 feet. And this side is also 3 feet. And if you do 3 feet times 3 feet to get your length times your width, you get 9 feet squared. So 1 yard squared is the same thing as 9 feet squared. I just want to show you that. The reason that this is important is because a lot of kids, when they're thinking about area, a lot of kids, they'll say, oh, well, if it's, because there's 3 feet in a yard, that would mean that if it's 9 yards squared, they just say, oh, well, I'll just divide it by 3 and I'll get 3 feet squared. But that's not how it works because it's actually 3 feet on both sides. So you have to divide it by the square, which is a little bit different. All right, so now we're going to write 2 unit rates relating square yards and square feet. So now we know that not just yards and feet, but square yards and square feet, based on our information here, one of the units, feet squared per yard squared, would be 9. You have 9 feet squared for every yard squared, which is what we have here. 9 feet squared for every 1 yard squared. Well, of course, then the other unit rate would be the reciprocal of that, which would be 1/9. Okay, so 1/9 of a yard squared is the same thing as 1 foot square. So using that information, we can convert Riley's 20 yards squared, which she found up here, and we're going to turn it into square feet and see if that's what Kelsey got, if we can use the unit rate. So we start with 20 yards squared, and we would like to go from yards squared to feet squared. So that's going to be yards going to feet. You'll use this one. Yards squared and feet squared. This will be feet squared trying to go to yards squared. Then you'll use this unit rate. So we are yards trying to go to feet. So we're going to do this first one. So it's 20 yards squared multiplied by the unit rate of 9 feet squared for every yard squared. Our yard squareds cancel out, and we end up with feet squared for our answer. So 20 times 9 equals 180 feet squared using our unit rate. And is that what Kelsey got? Yes. So they both, you can just figure out your length and your width calculation separately, or you can multiply by the unit rate of relating their square yards. All right, we got one more page for our lesson today. This one says a rectangle has a base length of 3 meters. So we've got 3 meters as the base and a height of 15 decimeters. Ooh, a decimeter. Do you guys know what decimeters are? Probably not. We don't really hear those. But we'll write it down. 15 decimeters. Now, a decimeter is smaller than a meter, and deci has to do with 10, right? So in our metric system, if you think of centimeter, it's tinier than a meter. It's broken up into 100. A decimeter is tinier than meter. It's broken up into 10, okay? So a centimeter is 100 pieces of a meter, but a decimeter is 10 pieces of a meter. So it's if you take a meter and you divide it into 10 equal parts, that's a decimeter. All right, so to find the area of our rectangle, we're going to have to make sure we use the same unit. Now you can make your answer decimeters squared, or you can make your answer meters squared. It depends on how you want to do it. Just like on the story before, Riley and Kelsey, there's 2 answers that were correct. 20 yards squared and 180 feet squared. They were both correct. It just depends on which unit you want to do. So we get to choose. This story does not tell us which one we have to do. Let's do meters. We're more familiar with meters. That's what I would like to do. So that means we need to turn this 15 decimeters, we need to turn it into meters. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to take it and multiply it by our unit rate. What is the unit rate? We need to find that. So I know that 1 meter is the same as 10 decimeters, okay? So if I have decimeters and I would like to, before I move that, the opposite unit rate then, we should always do both, would be the inverse of 1/10, which is just 10. So 10 decimeters equals a meter. Those are the 2 unit rates. So if you have meters and you're trying to get to decimeters, you would use the first one. If you have decimeters and you're trying to get to meters, you'd use the second one. So we're going to use the second one because we have decimeters. We want to figure out how many meters that is. So we're going to take our 15. We're going to multiply it by our unit rate of decimeters trying to find meters, which is 1/10. So 15 decimeters times 1/10 meters per decimeter. Decimeters cancel out, and then we have meters that are left. So 15 over 10. And 15 over 10 is like saying 15 divided by 10, which is like saying we're going to move our decimal place, and we get 1.5 meters. So this 15 decimeters is the same thing as 1.5 meters. Now the story told us to find the area of the rectangle. So area equals length times width. My length is 3 meters. They already told us that. And we're going to multiply it by our width, which is 1.5 meters. So if I can solve 3 times 1.5, I'll get my answer. And I ended up with 45, but I have to deal with my decimal. I had 1 decimal movement in my factors, so I have 1 decimal movement in my product, and I get 4.5. But just like the problem said, you have to make sure that you put your label in your answer. So is ours 4.5 meters squared or decimeters squared? Ours is meters squared because we had 3 meters times 1.5 meters. Now we could have done this a different way. We could have had decimeters squared for our answer if we did 15 times and then turned the 3 into decimeters, but That's not how we did it. So we will move on to our next problem. Number 19. It says, find the surface area of the rectangular prism at the right. Be sure to specify the unit in your answer. Okay, so just like before, we could do this two different ways. We could turn these all into inches, or we could turn them all into feet. Now, to me, turning this into inches seems easier, but maybe not. I think it is, though. I'm going to say 2 feet. How many inches are 2 feet? Well, to me, this one is so small, we could just do it in our head. It's 24 inches, right? Because 1 foot is 12 inches, and do another one, it'd be 24 inches. They're not always that easy, though. You could have taken your 2 feet and multiplied it by your unit rate, which we did right here. Feet, trying to turn it into inches, would be multiplying it by 12, which is what we did. 2 times 12 gave us 24. So now we get to find the surface area. Now, if you guys remember surface area, you have to find 2 of your front one, this one, and your back one, right? And that would be 18 times 18. So we have 2 of those, 2 of the 18 by 18 ones. We have to find 2 of our left and right ones, which are going to be 24 inches by 18 inches. And then we have our top and bottom. Our top and our bottom, which is 24 inches by 18 inches. Now for me, I noticed that my left and right and my top and bottom are both the same. So after I find out 24 times 18, I'm going to multiply it by 4 of them instead of just 2 of them. All right, so let's solve 18 by 18. And we get 324, but I need 2 of those, so I'm going to double that right now. And I get 648. So this is an important number. I'm going to circle it. Actually, I'm just going to put it right here. 2 of those would be 648. And then I need to solve 24 times 18. Okay. And I got 432, but I need 4 of those. So I'm going to do 432 times 4. I get 1,728. Now, if I want to find the surface area of this whole thing, I need to add these guys together, the 2 things that I circled. So 1,728 plus another 648. I didn't line those up very nicely, so I'm going to do that right now. 1,728 plus 648. 8 plus 8 is 16. 4 plus 2 is 6. 1 more is 7. 6 plus 7 is 13. 1 plus 1 is 2. And there is our final beautiful answer right there. 2,376, and it says specify our unit. Did we end up calculating feet squared or inches squared? We did 24 and 18. Those are all inches, so our final answer should be inches squared. All right, one last problem for our lesson today. Puzzle Penguin says the school nurse said that I'm 42 inches tall. I wanted to figure out how many feet this is, so here's what I did. 42 inches times 12 inches per foot, and I am 504 feet tall. I know I'm not 504 feet tall. Please help me figure out what I did wrong and help me find my real height. We can help with that, Puzzle Penguin. Of course you're not 504 feet tall. I can see right away that you multiplied by the wrong unit rate because your inches and your feet do not cancel each other out. They only cancel each other out in a unit rate if one's on the numerator and the same one's on the denominator. So what you should have done is 42 inches and multiplied it by the other unit rate, which is 1/12 feet per inch. Then you could have canceled out your inches and been left with feet. So I'm going to move on down here. We would have ended up with 42 feet over 12, and 42 over 12, we should probably figure that out because you're not going to have the nurse tell you you're 42/12 of a foot. That's crazy. So let's solve. What is 42 divided by 12? Well, 12 times 3 is 36. We get 6. So 6 is my numerator, 12 is my denominator. So I end up with 3 6/12, which is the same as 3 1/2 feet. And Puzzle Penguin, I believe much more that you are 3.5 feet tall and not 504 feet tall. So better luck next time calculating your height, because I think it was good that you recognized that you were not 504 feet tall. I would be freaked out if there's a penguin that big. All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging with me during this lesson, and we'll hear from you, or I guess you'll hear from me during the next one.